If demographics are destiny, is Western civilization destined for failure? Now that's pretty loaded. Let's talk about it. There's a compelling argument that the statistical characteristics of human populations plays a significant, if not defining, role in the future of a given nation. And Western nations are indeed, by objective demographic-related metrics, struggling. From my observation of history, misunderstanding demographics is one of the most unforgiving failures of a state's sovereignty, and I will give two opposite case studies to support this claim. But let's talk about mechanics for a second. What use is the population to the nation? The population is your workforce. It is your tax base. It is your soldiers. It really is your nation's future. Now, populations decline naturally. Wars claim lives. Plagues bring death, and old age takes its toll, and catastrophes are catastrophes. But civilizations, typically the lasting ones, fight to replenish what they've lost and don't overextend their demographic balance. Infamously, this is known as the baseline fertility ratio of 2.1 children per woman. Now, this is a very rough generalization, and there are indeed nuances, such as when you have true overpopulation or severe underpopulation. But as a general rule, it's important to acknowledge this number. Why? Because if you fall below or too high for long enough, the math does not add up on your side. Today, Europe is living the consequences. In 2024, the European Union's total fertility rate hit 1.34 live births per woman, a historic low, down from 1.38 the year before. While the latest data suggests a slight upward trend, it is still well below baseline. What's important is that fewer babies were born in 2024 than at any point since records began. And you know what this means. Shrinking tax bases, overburdened pensions, and hollowed-out militaries. Now, the modern reflex is immigration. Import people to fill the empty cradles, revitalize the tax base, boost the labor force, etc. But solving the demographic issue is actually a little more complicated than that. So, let's talk about every autist's favorite period of history, Rome. Case study 1. Rome, the Federati replacement trap. By the 4th and early 5th centuries, the Western Roman Empire was grappling with a serious demographic crisis. Plagues, constant wars, heavy taxes, inflation, labor shortages, rural flight, elite childishness, and declining agricultural yields all contributed to depopulation and recruitment struggles. Native Romans, especially in the West, simply weren't replenishing their population fast enough to sustain the army, the farms, or the tax base. Rome knew it needed help, so it leaned harder into a system that had existed in various forms for centuries, the Federati. For our purposes, think of the Federati as formal treaty alliances with non-Roman tribes and peoples. These are the Goths, the Franks, the Vandals, and others. In exchange for military service, these groups received subsidies, land grants inside Roman territory, and often significant autonomy to live under their own leaders and customary laws. But it did carry serious long-term risks. After years of mismanagement, broken promises, unpaid subsidies, and famine, tensions boiled over. In 410, the Visigoths, former Federati who felt betrayed, revolted under Alaric and sacked Rome itself, the first time the city had fallen in nearly 800 years. Decades later, in 455, the Vandals, who had earlier held a treaty relationship with Rome, exploited political chaos in the capital and sacked it again, then established their own kingdom in North Africa. The Rome example matters because the empire had essentially outsourced critical parts of its defense and labor to culturally distinct outsiders whose loyalty was conditional. When central authority weakened, these groups didn't just supplement the empire, they gradually replaced key pieces of it. They filled the power vacuum, accelerated fragmentation, and helped transform the Western Roman Empire into a patchwork of successor barbarian kingdoms. Now, for the flip side, explosive growth instead of decline. but with equally unforgiving mechanical consequences. From roughly 150 million people around 1700, the Qing's empire surged to around 450 million by the 1850s. That's a near quadrupling in under 2 centuries. The boom was driven by relative internal peace under strong early emperors like Kangxi and Qianlong. The widespread adoption of New World crops such as maize, sweet potatoes, and potatoes that boosted yields even on marginal lands, improved irrigation and farming techniques, and reasonably high effective disaster relief that reduced the worst mortality spikes from famines and plagues. High fertility persisted because, at least for a time, more mouths could still be fed. But the math did not remain on their side. Per capita farmland shrank dramatically as population outpaced arable land expansion. Rural poverty deepened amid fixed land rates and intensifying competition for resources. Silver outflows from opium trade deficits, widespread corruption, and eroding state capacity made things even worse. Internal migration played a double-edged role. The Qing initially restricted Han Chinese settlement in frontiers like Manchuria to preserve Manchu distinctiveness, but economic pressures led them to tolerate or even encourage it. Han farmers pushed into Manchuria, Sichuan, and Xinjiang, and other peripheries, boosting output and integrating regions, but also heightening land competition, ethnic tensions with local minorities, and resource strain back in the core provinces. Worse still was the meritocratic imperial examination system designed to recruit the best talent. It just couldn't absorb the flood of educated aspirants. As population grew, more young men studied for the exams, but the number of high-level jinshi degrees and bureaucratic posts stayed relatively fixed or grew too slowly. This created massive elite overproduction, legions of frustrated literate scholars who, instead of serving loyally, turned toward radicalism, teaching, banditry, or outright rebellion. The tipping point arrived in the mid-19th century with a wave of mega-rebellions. The most devastating was the Taiping Rebellion in 1850 to 1864, fueled by land hunger, elite discontent, millenarian Christian-inspired ideology, and economic desperation. It killed an estimated 20 to 30 million people, possibly more in broader impacts, and hollowed out the demographic and economic core in the Yangtze River region. The Qing eventually suppressed the uprising, but at enormous cost. Regional armies, often led by Han Chinese elites, gained de facto autonomy. Central authority eroded further, warlordism took root, and the dynasty limped on amid foreign humiliations from the Opium Wars and unequal treaties, until revolution finally toppled it in 1911 to 1912. Nuances. Demographics cut both ways, but the mechanics differ. Too few people hollow out the core, as in Rome's fertility decline and the Federati reliance. Too many, when unchecked and mismanaged, overwhelm resources, create elite overproduction, amplify ethnic and regional fractures through migration, and ignite explosive unrest. High fertility isn't inherently fatal. Qing growth was initially adaptive and powered real expansion, but without proportional institutional reforms, land adjustments, or technological leaps, surplus population becomes surplus discontent. The cradle doesn't have to empty to doom an empire. It can overflow until the entire structure cracks under its own weight. And we could examine many more, the Ottomans, the Spartans, the classical Greeks, and the Byzantines. But in every instance, the nuance is clear. Maintaining demographic balance demands consistent, pragmatic political effort, not just ideological assertions. It is worth noting, so far, that no great civilization has ever fully reversed the deep demographic imbalance purely through shortcuts like mass inflows without undergoing significant transformation, or losing core elements of its original character. This is not a moral claim. I'm actually a fan of immigration when handled responsibly. I think you can look at the early versions of the Federati system or Canada, and as a more modern example, in the 1960s when they had the points-based immigration approach, which prioritized skills and immigration. I think you can actually view that as such a success because many of the second-generation Canadians from very diverse, very different ethnic backgrounds have actually historically adopted Canadian cultural norms through the strong institutions assimilation over time and shared experiences. But it is worth noting that when inflows accelerate without matching infrastructure, integration capacity, or cultural cohesion, as we've seen with policy shifts since around 2015 and the heavy reliance on temporary residents in recent years, the outcomes become more uncertain. Canada's fertility rate hit a record low of 1.25 in 2024, with foreign-born mothers accounting for over 42% of births that year. But the results of sustained rapid compositional change amid ultra-low native fertility are still unfolding and yet to be seen. But if we turn to history, it paints a sobering picture. The unfortunate reality is that when the cradle empties, the future gets borrowed, and borrowed futures come with compound interest, diluted identity, fractured social cohesion, strained institutions, and, over generation, someone else's story gradually written over your own. Closing. Thanks for tuning in. This is part 1 of a new series I'm working on called The 7 Pillars of Sovereignty. In it, we'll examine the cause and effect patterns behind the rise and falls of civilizations throughout history, not to despair, but to inform practical choices so we can help strengthen our own countries. If you found this valuable, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon. I won't spam you with shorts. You'll only get notifications when full-length videos drop. Thanks again, and have a good one.